I've supported myself since I was 15 and never took a single cent from my family. At 25, I finally bought my own house, and my parents sued me for ruining my brother's chances. The people who are supposed to protect you, the ones who raised you, turn into your worst enemies. Not just arguing, not just disagreeing, but actually suing you for the very success you built with your own two hands. And all because they wanted your house, for my brother. My name's Daniel, and I'm 27 now. But this whole nightmare began unfolding when I was just 15, simmering in the background of my childhood. I've always had this deep-seated aversion to feeling like I owe anyone anything. Maybe it's because my parents had a permanent, unspoken scoreboard etched into their minds. Every meal, every car ride, every single favor they did for us wasn't really free. Oh no. They'd trotted out months, sometimes even years later, like a dusty receipt they were waiting for me to pay back. It left me feeling like even the most basic parenting was something I had to earn. And when you're a teenager, that kind of emotional accounting leaves a mark. Money was always a complicated, loaded subject in our house. It wasn't that my parents were poor, they both had decent jobs. But my younger brother, Ryan, he was their golden child. He's 3 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, everything in our family seemed to orbit around him. Private soccer training, expensive summer camps, top-of-the-line clothes, no matter the cost, Mom and Dad never hesitated. For me, though, if I wanted anything beyond the absolute bare essentials, the answer was always the same. You don't need it, or get a job and buy it yourself. So I did. At 15, while Ryan was off playing in tournaments or hanging out with his friends, I was bussing tables at a local diner. It wasn't glamorous work. My hands were raw from scrubbing dishes, but it gave me my own money and, more importantly, my independence. That job led to another, then another. By the time I graduated high school, I actually had savings. Not a ton, but enough to pay for community college without ever having to ask my parents for a single cent. I remember my dad making some offhand comment about me, saying I probably thought I was better than everyone else because I didn't need their help. At the time, I just laughed it off. College was where the divide between me and my family really started to widen. While I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and a full course load, Ryan was finding himself, which apparently meant dropping out of college after a single semester and then spending the next few years working odd jobs, quitting every time he didn't vibe with the management. And my parents? They always had an excuse ready for him. He's just figuring things out. He's got a lot of potential. You know, he's not like you, Daniel. I started noticing a pattern. Anytime I achieved something, it was brushed off as no big deal. But if Ryan did the bare minimum, it was a family celebration. Fast forward a few years. When I was 24, I landed a solid job in tech. It wasn't flashy at first, but I worked hard, learned everything I could, and started climbing that corporate ladder. Within a year, I was finally making enough to think about getting out of my cramped apartment. I didn't tell my parents right away. I knew how they were. But I quietly started looking at houses. Every open house I went to felt surreal, like I was getting closer to something that had always felt impossible for someone like me. The day I closed on my first home, I was shaking with sheer excitement. It wasn't some mansion, but it was mine. I'd worked for every brick, every dollar of that down payment. I decided to invite my parents and Ryan over for dinner as a surprise, foolishly thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud. That was my first mistake. The moment they stepped inside, I saw it in my mom's face. She wasn't happy for me. She was calculating. Her eyes swept over the place like she was taking inventory. My dad made a lame joke about me secretly winning the lottery. And Ryan? He barely said a word, just walked around like he was scoping the place out. The only genuine reaction I got was from my aunt, who came along and kept saying how impressed she was. But when we sat down to eat, the comments started. "It's nice," my mom said, "but then, don't you think it's a bit much for someone your age?" "Yeah," Ryan chimed in, "you probably could have helped out with other things instead of splurging on this." I remember putting my fork down slowly, my chest tightening, and asking, "What other things?" That's when my mom gave me this look, like I was supposed to know exactly what she meant. Your brother's been talking about going back to school, she said, her voice laced with expectation. But you know how expensive that is. We thought maybe, well, you've got this big house now. You could have chipped in a little to help him get a head start. It hit me like a slap across the face. Not once had they asked if I needed help with my down payment, my furniture, my bills. But now that I had something to show for myself, it was already being mentally allocated to Ryan. I tried to keep my voice steady. I worked for this. I didn't take anything from you. Why should I be expected to pay for Ryan's choices? The air got tense. My dad muttered something about family helping family, and Ryan looked at me like I'd personally betrayed him. I ended that dinner early. As they left, my mom gave me a hug, the kind that's more like a squeeze, and whispered, "Don't be selfish, Daniel. We'll talk about this again." I thought maybe it would just blow over. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, little comments started creeping into every conversation. My mom would call and say things like, "Ryan's been looking at classes, but we just can't make it work without some help," adding, "And it's such a shame when people in the family have the means to help and just don't." My dad kept reminding me of everything they'd supposedly done for me growing up, which was laughable considering how little they'd actually supported me financially. The final straw before things exploded came one Sunday afternoon. I got a text from Ryan, "We need to talk. Come by." I figured maybe he wanted to apologize, or at least explain himself. But when I showed up, my parents were there too, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out, college brochures, tuition breakdowns, even a printed proposal for how much I could reasonably contribute to Ryan's education over the next 4 years. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud because it was so utterly absurd. "You seriously made a payment plan for me, for my brother?" I asked, disbelief dripping from my voice. My mom shot me a sharp look. "This isn't a joke, Daniel. This is his future. If you care about family, you'll do this." And then Ryan, with zero shame, chimed in, "I mean, it's not like you don't have the money. You bought a whole house, man. Why should you get to have all that while I'm stuck here?" Something in me snapped that day. I stood up, told them I wasn't giving a single cent, and walked out. I thought maybe they'd be mad for a while, maybe even stop talking to me for a bit. I didn't think they'd go as far as they did next. Because 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer. And when I read it, my hands started shaking all over again. But this time, it wasn't excitement. It was pure, white-hot rage. I must have read that letter a dozen times before it sank in. My own parents were suing me. The claim was something about willfully depriving a dependent family member of necessary opportunities. The dependent being Ryan, of course. They were framing it like I'd somehow blocked him from getting an education, as if my refusal to fund his second attempt at college was the same as taking money away from him. It was so outrageous, I almost thought it had to be some kind of bluff. The letter demanded a settlement, an amount suspiciously close to the total tuition costs they'd shown me at the kitchen table. It also hinted at emotional damages Ryan had suffered because I flaunted my success in his face. I remember sitting there at my dining table, my coffee going cold, and just thinking, this can't be real. Surely they wouldn't actually go through with it. But they did. Within a week, my mom started calling me daily, each time switching between guilt and anger. One day, it was, "Daniel, you're tearing this family apart. Is a little generosity really worth losing us over?" The next, it was, "Your brother's devastated. He feels like you want him to fail." She would cry on the phone, sometimes for minutes at a time without saying anything, just to make me feel like I was crushing her. Ryan, meanwhile, was doubling down on the entitlement. He started posting vague jabs on social media. Things like, "Some people only care about themselves, even if it ruins others' lives," accompanied by sad emojis and inspirational quotes about family loyalty. Of course, his friends and our extended family, most of whom didn't know the full story, would comment things like, "That's so messed up, I'm so sorry you're going through this." It was like he was setting up a little pity stage for himself and milking it for all it was worth. I started noticing the subtle ways my parents were twisting the narrative to relatives. At a cousin's birthday party, my aunt pulled me aside and said, "I just wish you and Ryan could work this out. He's been so down since you bought that house." I asked her what she meant, and she said, "Well, your parents told us you refused to help him after making all this money." No mention of how I'd been on my own since I was a teenager, or how Ryan had blown multiple chances already, just the edited, family-friendly version that made me look cold and selfish. It got to the point where I started dreading family events. At my grandmother's Sunday lunch, I overheard my dad telling a neighbor that Daniel's gotten too big for his boots and forgot where he came from. I tried to let it roll off my back, but it was harder than I thought. I wasn't just being painted as the villain. I was being erased. Years of struggle, every sacrifice I'd made, every hour of overtime, none of it counted. The only thing that mattered to them was that I wasn't bending to their will. One night, Ryan actually showed up at my house unannounced. He didn't even knock, just stood outside ringing the doorbell until I opened it. He looked smug, like he'd been waiting to deliver a perfectly rehearsed line. "You know you're going to lose, right?" he said casually. "Mom and Dad have the lawyer, and the family's on their side. It'll be easier if you just pay up now and save yourself the embarrassment." I couldn't believe the arrogance. I told him to leave, and when he didn't move, I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. We stood there on my front porch, him with that half smirk, me trying to keep my voice level. "You're not entitled to my money, Ryan," I said. "You've had chance after chance, and you've thrown them away. This is on you, not me." That's when he said something that really lodged itself in my brain. "You only got here because you had it easier than me. Mom and Dad were harder on me. I deserve a fair shot, too. Easier." He actually thought my life had been easier. I stared at him for a long second before saying, "If you think I had it easy, you weren't paying attention." Then I went back inside and locked the door. From that night on, things ramped up even more. My parents stopped calling directly and started going through other people, aunts, uncles, even my grandmother. I'd get voicemails like, "Sweetheart, your mom says this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe if you sent your brother a little something to get started, we could all move on." Or, "Daniel, you know, your father's blood pressure isn't good. This stress isn't helping." Every single one was another attempt to wear me down. Meanwhile, the lawsuit was moving forward. I had to hire my own lawyer just to defend myself from my own family. Every document that came through had their names on it, my parents, my brother, in black and white. It didn't matter that it was absurd or that I knew I'd win. The emotional weight of it was crushing. At night, I'd lie in bed and wonder how the same people who were supposed to protect me could turn into this. And then came the moment I realized they weren't just trying to get money from me. They were trying to take something much bigger. It started with a voicemail from my realtor, of all people. She sounded concerned. She said she'd gotten a strange inquiry about my house, asking if it was available for purchase or rental because the current occupant might not be there much longer. She didn't give me a name, but I didn't need one. There were only 3 people who knew exactly how to hit me where it would hurt the most. I called my realtor back immediately, and she confirmed what I already suspected. The inquiry hadn't come from some random stranger. It had been my mother. She had actually called my realtor, pretending to be a friend of the family, and asked about my house as if she was just curious. But my realtor, sensing something odd, pressed her a bit and found out that my mom had hinted I might not be able to keep the property much longer and that it would be a shame if it went to waste when another family member could use it. My chest tightened, a cold knot forming. Another family member. There was no mistaking who she meant. They weren't just trying to get money out of me. They were setting the stage to take my house. I sat there at my kitchen table, phone in hand, staring out the window for what felt like hours. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. This wasn't just Ryan being entitled or my parents guilt-tripping me. This was a deliberate move to undermine everything I'd worked for. The place I had fought to buy, the one symbol of independence I had from them. They were already circling it like vultures. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started clicking into place. That first dinner when I invited them over, the way my mom's eyes had scanned the place, the comment about it being a bit much for someone my age, Ryan's digs about me, having all that while he's stuck here. It had all been leading up to this. The lawsuit wasn't just about tuition. If they could paint me as someone who unfairly deprived Ryan, they could spin it into some legal leverage over my assets, my house. And then the real gut punch came. I got an email from my lawyer forwarding a newly filed amendment in their case. It claimed that part of the reason they were seeking damages was because the defendant's current living situation was acquired through funds that could have been allocated to support the plaintiff's education and career development. In other words, they were trying to argue that my house itself was evidence of my selfishness and misallocation of resources. They weren't just hinting at it now. They were putting it in legal writing. That night, I called my mom. I didn't even plan what I was going to say. I just needed to hear her voice and understand how she could possibly justify this. She picked up after a few rings, and her voice was sickly sweet, like nothing was wrong. "Daniel, I was just telling your aunt how proud I am of you." "Cut it, Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "Why did you call my realtor?" There was a pause. Then, without missing a beat, she sighed. "I was just looking out for the family. If things don't go your way in court, it would be better if the house stayed with someone in the family instead of strangers. You know Ryan would take good care of it." I felt my jaw clench. "You're planning for me to lose my home before the case is even over? You've already decided I'm guilty." "It's not about guilt, Daniel. It's about doing what's right for your brother. He's been through so much." "So much." I cut in, my voice rising. "He's had every opportunity handed to him while I've been on my own since I was a teenager. I worked for this house. You never helped me, not once. And now you think you can just take it?" Her tone shifted, sharper now. "Don't be dramatic. You wouldn't be where you are without how we raised you. We made sacrifices, too. This is your chance to give back." Give back. That phrase hit me like a brick. It was the same thing she'd said when I was 16 and refused to hand over half my paycheck to help with household expenses while Ryan got to spend his allowance on video games. It was the same phrase she'd used when I declined to co-sign a car loan for him at 21. To her, my success wasn't mine. It was a debt I owed them, one they could collect on whenever they wanted. I hung up without saying another word. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, something that made my stomach twist, a mix of betrayal and absolute clarity. Because in that moment, I finally understood. They were never going to stop. It didn't matter how much I explained, how much I showed them that I'd built my life without their help. In their minds, Ryan's failures were my responsibility to fix, and anything I had was fair game. The only justice they believed in was one where Ryan came out on top, even if it meant tearing me down to nothing. The next week, things got worse. I found out from a mutual friend that Ryan had been bragging to a couple of his buddies, that the house would be as soon. One of them apparently asked if I was selling, and Ryan had smirked and said, "Not exactly. Let's just say Mom and Dad are handling it." Hearing that broke something in me. I'd spent years swallowing little jabs, letting them chip away at my achievements because I didn't want to cause waves. But now they were trying to strip me of the one thing that symbolized all those years of grinding, all those nights I'd gone without so I could save for a future no one else believed in. And that's when I made a decision. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But I wasn't going to fight it their way. I was going to make sure that when I pushed back, they'd regret ever thinking they could take what was mine. The weeks that followed felt like walking through quicksand. Every day there was another blow, another reminder that my own family had positioned themselves as my enemies. My lawyer was doing what he could, but every new filing from their side felt like a punch to the gut. The language was so cold, so calculated. It was like they'd erased me as a son and rewritten me as some faceless opponent they needed to beat in court. I stopped sleeping properly. Some nights I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, my mind running in loops. What if they somehow won? What if they took the house? Where would I go? What would I have left? My home had always been my sanctuary, the first place I could close the door and know no one could barge in and tell me what to do. Now, even sitting in my living room felt tense, like the walls weren't mine anymore. My work started to suffer too. I'd catch myself zoning out in meetings, missing deadlines because I was buried in legal paperwork. My boss noticed, and while he was sympathetic when I told him it was a family legal matter, I could tell his patience wouldn't last forever. I'd worked so hard to build a reputation as reliable, as someone who could handle anything thrown at me, and now I was watching it crack. The worst part was the isolation. My parents had done such a good job of controlling the story that most of my extended family thought I was being cruel. Invitations to birthdays, dinners, and even casual get-togethers started to slip through the cracks. I'd see photos posted online, big smiling group shots with captions like, "Family first," and there'd be Ryan grinning in the middle, my parents on either side. I wasn't even mentioned anymore. One night, I opened my fridge and realized I hadn't done a proper grocery run in weeks. I'd been living off takeout and whatever I could grab from the corner store because I didn't have the energy to shop. Standing there in the dim light of the fridge, staring at a single carton of eggs and half a bottle of orange juice, I felt this wave of hopelessness wash over me. It wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. It was the feeling that no matter what I did, I'd always be the outsider in my own family. But in that low moment, something else sparked too. I remembered being 15, standing behind the counter at the diner on a Friday night, my hands raw from scrubbing dishes, knowing I had to be up early for a double shift the next day. I'd done that for years without a safety net, without anyone cheering me on. Every single step I'd taken since then had been because I refused to give up when it would have been easier to quit. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. I stopped answering their calls. I told my lawyer to handle all communication, no matter how trivial, so I wouldn't have to hear their voices or read their manipulative messages. I started quietly going through my finances, making sure every asset I had was locked down, every account secured. I pulled my credit report to check for anything suspicious. I even installed a security system on my house, just in case Ryan decided to drop by again. In public, I played it calm. If anyone asked how I was doing, I'd just say handling it and change the subject. But privately, I was building something, a plan. Because I realized that if I fought them head-on, they'd just keep trying to twist the story until I looked like the aggressor. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to let them dig their own hole, and then make sure they couldn't climb out of it. The first step was gathering proof, not just for court, but for me. Proof of every manipulative call, every backhanded comment, every time they tried to undermine me. If I was going to fight back, I wanted it all in black and white. Still, I kept my head down. Outwardly, it looked like they'd beaten me down into silence. And maybe that's what they believed, which was exactly what I wanted them to think. Because when you're at rock bottom, no one sees you coming back. And I was going to make sure my return hit them harder than they ever expected. It's strange how once you stop feeding someone's drama, they start thinking you've disappeared. My parents and Ryan seemed to take my silence as proof that they were winning. In reality, it gave me the space I needed to rebuild. Not just my defenses, but my life. The first change came at work. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, and I braced myself for bad news. Instead, he closed the door and said, "Look, I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but I know you're good at what you do. If you can focus, I'm willing to put you on a project that could lead to a promotion." It was like someone had cracked a window in a stuffy room, a rush of fresh air. I threw myself into that project. Long hours, meticulous planning, going the extra mile. I wasn't just trying to prove myself to my boss, I was reminding myself what I was capable of. And it worked. The project was a success, and a few weeks later I was offered the promotion. Along with it came a significant pay bump, enough that my financial cushion grew thicker, my savings healthier. It didn't erase the stress of the lawsuit, but it made me feel secure again. Meanwhile, my lawyer was quietly picking apart their case. He'd managed to get records of Ryan's past employment history, his previous failed college attempts, even messages where my parents admitted they'd spoiled him too much. Each piece was another thread in the fabric of their hypocrisy. I didn't gloat. Not yet. I just filed it all away, letting it pile up. Outside of work, I started focusing on myself again. I rejoined the gym I'd quit months ago, partly to clear my head and partly to remind myself that my body didn't have to carry the weight of all this stress. I started cooking real meals again. Nothing fancy, but there was something therapeutic about chopping vegetables and actually sitting down to eat. I also began reconnecting with people I'd drifted from. Not the family members who'd bought into my parents' version of events. I left them to their group photos and fake smiles, but old friends, coworkers I trusted, people who knew me without the filter of my family's gossip. Little by little, I rebuilt a circle around me that wasn't poisoned by their manipulation. And then something unexpected happened. I was invited to speak at a local networking event for young professionals. Someone had seen the results of my project at work and thought my career path was inspiring. Standing on that stage, telling my story, the professional one, not the messy personal parts, I realized I wasn't the powerless kid busting tables anymore. I had built something. And no matter what my family thought they could take from me, they couldn't take that. With every win, big or small, I felt the balance shifting. My parents still had their lawsuit. But outside of that courtroom, their control over me was slipping. They couldn't guilt me into calls I wouldn't answer. Couldn't twist my words if I didn't give them any. They had to go through lawyers for everything now, which meant no more surprise ambushes at my front door or accidental run-ins at family gatherings. The best part? While they were busy burning bridges with me, they were also wearing down their own credibility. A mutual acquaintance let slip that some relatives were starting to question why my parents were dragging me through court instead of helping Ryan get his life together. Apparently, Ryan had been bragging so openly about getting the house that even people on their side were starting to see how bad it looked. That was when I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was gaining ground. My career was stronger. My finances were secure. And I had allies who saw through the lies. I was in a position now where I didn't have to react to their moves. I could plan my own. And as much as I wanted to strike back right away, I forced myself to wait because timing, I realized, was everything. Let them think I was just living my life, moving on. Let them keep underestimating me. Because the next time I made a move, it wouldn't just protect what was mine. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon of all days. I was leaving a client meeting when my phone buzzed with an email from my lawyer. The subject line read, "Discovery request, opposing counsel error." Inside was a forwarded thread. My parents' lawyer had accidentally copied my attorney on an email chain that was meant to be internal between their side, and in it was a gold mine. The chain was mostly logistics, timelines, filing deadlines. But buried halfway down, there was a message from my mother to their lawyer that made my pulse quicken. She'd written, "We need to make sure Daniel's house is included in any settlement. Ryan has already been in touch with a realtor friend who can list it as soon as it's signed over. This is the cleanest way to ensure he gets a fresh start." There it was. In writing. Proof that the lawsuit was never about helping Ryan get an education. It was about transferring my house into his name. My lawyer practically hummed with energy when we spoke that evening. "This changes everything," he said. "They've essentially admitted to ulterior motives. We can use this." But I didn't want to just use it to defend myself. I wanted to turn it into the foundation of something bigger, something that would end their ability to pull this stunt ever again. Around the same time, work presented me with another opportunity. My promotion had put me in charge of a small team, but now I was being offered a cross-department leadership role on a high-visibility project. It came with two major perks: significantly more income and connections with senior executives in industries far beyond my current reach. The kind of people who could, if necessary, open doors I didn't even know existed. I accepted without hesitation. Not only did this strengthen my financial position even more, but it also gave me flexibility, the ability to quietly channel resources where I wanted them. And one of the first things I did was hire a private investigator. I didn't want anything illegal or invasive. I just wanted the truth. I wanted to know exactly what Ryan had been doing while his future supposedly hung in the balance, and whether my parents had a history of pulling similar moves with other relatives. The investigator didn't disappoint. 2 weeks later, I had a thick folder on my desk. Inside were social media posts from accounts Ryan thought were private, showing him on trips, buying expensive electronics, and even test-driving cars in the months he'd been claiming he was barely scraping by. There were also property records showing my parents had years ago tried to pressure my late aunt into selling them a piece of land for a fraction of its value, something that had caused a rift no one talked about anymore. The more I read, the clearer my path became. I didn't need to just win the case. I needed to dismantle the narrative they'd built, piece by piece, in front of an audience that mattered. To do that, I started laying groundwork quietly. I reached out to a few trusted family members who'd stayed neutral, sharing just enough to plant seeds of doubt about my parents' version of events. I made sure my financial records, employment history, and proof of independence since I was a teenager were neatly documented, time-stamped, and ready to be shown to anyone who mattered. And the best part? That incriminating email chain wasn't the only mistake they made. My PI had managed to uncover a conversation recorded legally in a public setting where Ryan bragged to a friend at a bar that he'd finally found a way to cash in on having a rich brother. The friend had laughed, asking if I'd agreed to it. And Ryan replied, "No, man. Mom and Dad are making it happen. Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and be set for years." I listened to that recording 3 times in a row, each time feeling the same cold clarity settle in. They thought they were closing in, but in reality, they'd already handed me the tools to break them wide open. All I had to do now was choose the perfect moment to pull the pin. I waited. Not out of hesitation, but because I knew the most devastating strike wasn't a loud, angry blow. It was a quiet, precise one. My parents and Ryan were still moving full steam ahead with their case, oblivious to the fact that they'd already laid the groundwork for their own undoing. The court date was approaching, and with it came the pretrial conference, the meeting where both sides would lay out their strongest positions to gauge whether a settlement was possible. That was my stage. When we walked into the conference room, my parents were there with Ryan, sitting smugly between them. My mother gave me that self-satisfied smile she used when she thought she had the upper hand. My dad avoided my eyes, a silent show of mock disappointment. Ryan, of course, leaned back in his chair like he was already signing the deed to my house. The mediator began with pleasantries, then asked my lawyer to speak first. We'd agreed beforehand, no emotion, no long speeches, just facts. My lawyer slid a thin binder across the table to their side. "This," he said, "is the complete documentation of my client's financial independence since age 15. Employment records, tax returns, proof of tuition payments, and property purchase receipts. You'll note not a single cent came from his parents at any point." Ryan snorted quietly, but my lawyer didn't pause. He flipped the binder open to a flagged page. "And here," he said evenly, "is an email from the plaintiffs, in their own words, confirming that this lawsuit's primary goal is to obtain the defendant's home for transfer to another party." My mother's face drained of color so fast it was almost comical. My dad's lips pressed into a thin line. Ryan sat forward, trying to read the page, his confidence wobbling. "And lastly," my lawyer said, pressing a button on his laptop, a short audio clip. Ryan's voice filled the room. "No, man. Mom and Dad are making it happen. Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and be set for years." Silence. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock. My lawyer let it hang for a good 5 seconds before saying, "Given these facts, we believe the court will not only dismiss the case, but will find grounds for filing a countersuit for damages, including legal fees and reputational harm." The mediator cleared his throat and looked at their lawyer. "Do you wish to respond?" Their lawyer's face was tight, his jaw working like he was chewing on nails. He leaned toward my parents, whispering urgently. My mother shook her head rapidly, eyes darting to me with something that looked almost like fear. Ryan muttered something under his breath that made my dad glare at him. Finally, their lawyer straightened up. "We'll need a moment to discuss this privately." They left the room. I sat there, my hands folded, not saying a word. Inside, I felt that strange, satisfying calm that comes when you know the fight is already over. 10 minutes later, they came back in, their expressions carefully blank. "We're willing to withdraw the lawsuit," their lawyer said stiffly, "with each party covering their own legal fees." My lawyer didn't even look at me before replying. "That's unacceptable. We have clear evidence of malicious intent and will proceed with our countersuit unless we receive a written apology, a public retraction of all prior statements made against my client, and full reimbursement of his legal costs." Ryan's head snapped toward my parents. "We're not." "Yes, we are." My mother cut in, her voice tight, and that was it. In that room, they caved. I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat, didn't even look at Ryan as he sat there fuming. I let the paperwork speak for me. By the end of the week, I had the apology letter in my inbox, a clumsy attempt at sounding sincere, and the reimbursement check cleared shortly after. But that wasn't the true revenge. The real blow landed when I sent copies of the apology and the incriminating evidence to the handful of relatives who had iced me out over the past year. No explanation, just the documents. Within days, the phone calls started coming, not from my parents, but from those same relatives, awkwardly checking in, clearly realizing they'd bet on the wrong horse. I didn't answer most of them, because the point of revenge, I realized, wasn't to win them back. It was to make sure they understood that I didn't need them, and that trying to take me down only made me stronger. The fallout was fast, and it was ugly. Though, for once, none of it was mine to deal with. Word of what had happened spread through the family faster than I expected. My aunt, the one who'd been so impressed with my house the day they first saw it, called me half angry, half stunned. They tried to take your home from their own son. She wasn't the only one. Cousins, uncles, even my grandmother. People who'd stayed silent before were suddenly talking. The family group chat that I'd been quietly removed from months ago turned into a battlefield. Screenshots of the apology letter started popping up. And every time someone tried to defend my parents, another relative would drop a quote from the email or that recording of Ryan bragging. For the first time in my life, the golden image my parents had built for themselves cracked in public. They stopped showing up to family gatherings, not because they weren't invited, but because they couldn't stand the questions. My mother, who had once relished being the center of attention, started avoiding calls from her own siblings. My dad became quieter, grayer somehow. No longer the booming, self-assured man who used to laugh at my independence. And Ryan? He took it the hardest. His so-called friends, the ones he bragged to about cashing in, started distancing themselves. Without the house, without the settlement, he had nothing to show for the months he'd spent circling me like a shark. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved out of my parents' house for a bit, then quietly returned when rent and bills proved too much. The smugness I'd seen in his eyes at that pre-trial conference was gone. Now, when our paths occasionally crossed, usually at some unavoidable family obligation, he barely made eye contact. The check they sent me covered every cent of my legal fees. But it was the apology letter that I kept, tucked away in a drawer. Not because I needed the validation, I didn't, but because it was proof. Proof that no matter how much they tried to rewrite history, there was a moment where they had to admit they were wrong. I didn't seek reconciliation. I didn't move past it for the sake of family harmony. Instead, I built further on the life I'd been creating. Work kept growing. My circle of trusted friends stayed tight, and my home remained exactly where it belonged, mine. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch in the quiet of the evening, I think about that first dinner when I invited them over, back when I thought they might be proud. I think about how quickly the masks came off when they saw what I'd built without them. And I realized that the real victory wasn't just keeping my house or winning the case. It was proving beyond any doubt that I never needed them to succeed, and that no matter what they tried, they could never take that away. And that's when I lean back, smile to myself, and think, this home will never have their name on it.